Hello, I'm Susan Saldivar, and welcome to Inside Cinema. In this episode, you'll meet a young and talented film composer by the name of Aaron Zigman. Aaron has already composed the music for two earlier major motion pictures, John Q starring Denzel Washington, and the very romantic love story, The Notebook, starring Rachel McAdams, Ryan Gosling, James Gardner, and Jenna Rollins. Both films were directed by Nick Cassavetes. I now invite you to travel with me into the life of Aaron Zigman and learn what it takes to make it in the elite world of film composing.
I think my first recollection as a young kid listening to music was my mom playing piano and playing harp, and my sister played piano as well, and so everybody was pretty much into music in my family. And aside from starting to learn how to play piano when I was just turning 6, I just remember listening to Beatles records.
You like Beatles? I remember a story, I think you had told me once, that you actually claimed to have written a Beatles song.
I did. Well, it's not that. For some reason, I don't know, I loved records, and I just remember one time when my uncle was over, I walked into the little playroom and I started playing a Beatles record, and I put it on, and I said, "Close your eyes, don't close your eyes." And he was listening. He goes, "I wrote this." So I started plagiarizing it at a young age. It was amazing. But I think it stems from me loving records, and eventually I wound up, playing on records and writing songs on records and orchestrating and whatnot. And
you were signed at an early age.
Almo Irving was one of about 3 or 4 publishing companies I knocked on the door. It was 1984, and so I wrote a song for Carly Simon. I wrote a song for TV show Fame. I remember I wrote my first hit with Almo Irving was a song called Crush on You.
In fact, that was the next step in Aaron's journey into the music industry. He produced, arranged, composed, and played with some of the most talented artists in the pop world, such as Phil Collins, Natalie Cole, Seal, and Tina Turner.
Now, how do you think your pop music has helped you in your film scoring?
You learn to write the short form. And in pop music, there's a sense of melody. Why songs are successful and why people like songs, why? It's because there's a melody that you remember. Yeah. So it's that hook, so to speak.
All great artists seek out mentors and teachers to guide them along their journey.
My mother's second cousin was a gentleman by the name of George Bassman, who wrote scores for Marty, Postman Always Rings Twice.
Wow.
George was writing hit songs at the age of 19. One of them was I'm Getting Sentimental Over You. Over the years, his arrangements became widely known. He was in demand by some of the biggest names in the business: Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, and Tommy Dorsey.
Film music enables you to just stretch beyond these short forms and styles. And also, I always kind of say that in writing orchestral music, you're able to write the chord. And the neat thing about what George gave me was this great sense of 20th century literature that I didn't know a lot about.
He really gave you your classical music background.
Education.
He educated you in that.
He was the beginnings of my education, and it was funny because I really was interested in the orchestra at that age and wanted to learn how to write for the orchestra. And I didn't go to music school, and neither did he. So we were talking about that, I remember. And I said, "Well, how did you learn how to write for the orchestra?" And he handed me the Piston book and said, "Here you go, kid, this is how I did it." I wound up studying with him and befriending him for about, 5 to 7 years before he died.
Perhaps one of the biggest contributors and supporters of Aaron Zigman is the artist Peter Max.
I first met Peter Max when I actually, in 1985 or 6, it was actually, I can tell you exactly, it was the summer of 85.
I met him when he was only 21 years old, and he sat down at the keyboards. I just couldn't believe how many diversities came out of him in a short moment. from bebop to, to classical. It's unbelievable.
What would Peter Mack sound like on the piano? Like, I mean, like his
Peter?
personality, yeah.
I mean, Peter's funky, he's wild, he's crazy. Over the years, he's just become real close and kind of a mentor for me and good friend.
And I always told him, I says, Aaron, you got to write for the movies. He said to me, movies? It was so far-fetched for him. I said to him, you've got to. And then he got the fever of it.
The tragic death of Itzhak Rabin would prove to be a turning point in Aaron's life.
I was sitting in this house, and it was about 3 in the morning. I was up watching TV, and all of a sudden, all the footage came. And Rabin, unbeknownst to me later on, I found, who hated to dance and really didn't like to sing, was singing at the rally. And so Eaton Haber, on this footage at CNN, it showed Eaton Haber, his speechwriter, pulled out this song sheet from his jacket, and it was stained with blood. And this is the Song of Peace.
I called Aaron just to say hi, and he said to me, you know what just happened? I said, no. He said, the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin just got killed.
So I woke up in the morning, and I went to the piano and just started playing, and I remember it was a really foggy day, misty day. It was just pre-Christmas. And
he started, doing these unbelievable chords, and about Leah, Rabin's wife, speaking to him, and it all came out, and I had chills. It says, Aaron, you've got to do it.
I didn't stop writing for about 6 months, and I just became obsessed with his life. And so I wrote a 35-minute tone poem.
We met about 20 years ago. The first time I met him, it was at a doorway, and he had a piece of music in his hand. And I was leaving, and he was coming in, and we just met right there in the doorway, and I saw the music.
He snatches this chart out of me in front of me, he looks at it, and he starts whistling the melody. I'm like, he's right, that's it.
I did see some footage of a tone poem that Aaron wrote for the late, great Israeli leader, Itzhak Rabin.
I watched Aaron write that piece. The Leah is just, it brings tears to my eyes when I think about the melodies he wrote. It's just soars. Jerry's won 8 Grammys for Horn Arranger of the Year.
One of the greatest arrangers in music ever. Jerry's funny because Jerry has a real perfect pitch.
Yeah, right.
So I'll be, sometimes I'll call Jerry on the phone and I'll say, what do you think of that? What do you think of that?
And I can say anything to Aaron that I'm feeling, whether I like it or not, whether it's, appropriate or not.
Aaron, one time, he said, my band is playing. Would you come see it?
There was a concert in 1998 that was sponsored by the Federation, and the late Prime Minister Rabin's son was there, Yuval.
And I saw a 90-piece orchestra. 90-piece! On that, and I was like, are you kidding me? I didn't know that he had it in him. I didn't know what he did.
I think that piece of music impressed him.
Well, I work at New Line Cinema as a Senior Vice President of Music, and my role here is music executive and music supervisor. My job is much like being a matchmaker. Yeah. When I have to find the right composer for a filmmaker, in addition to making sure, obviously, the musical component is right, it's much like setting someone up on a blind date. To Nick's credit, he really saw the potential that Aaron had, really believed in him, believed in his talents, and really wanted to work with him.
Aaron, wanting to prove himself, hires a 90-piece orchestra, which includes one of his close collaborators, violist Brian Denbo.
To collaborate with people who just challenge you, who are open to your input, and Aaron is very much open to the input of those with whom he works.
They had Temps, the opening scene, with somebody singing some version of some Ave Maria of another composer's, and so I got wind early on that they like this, so I better write my own. And that's what I did.
And that's what you did.
And that's actually what got me the job.
And that, for me, is a very daring soundtrack. I mean, for a guy to come out the blocks with that, you're like, are you kidding me? That was a big film, and it was his first big film, and he kind of looked at me like I was out of my mind. But I said, if we're going to go on the toilet, let's go on the toilet together, man.
You know, I think Aaron really rose to the challenge. I mean, he had an incredible drama placed in front of him, and the balance hung on his shoulders.
You know, you can like it, you don't like it, that really doesn't matter. It matters that he showed himself as a force to be reckoned with on the scene.
Aaron showed his creative versatility with Showtime's Crown Heights.
Crown Heights was a storied movie that was a Showtime movie that was directed by Jeremy Kagan. We had spoken about Crown Heights, which Crown Heights, to quick synopsis, was a movie about the riots in '91 in New York between the Hasidim Jewish population and the African American community. So in the end, we talked about bridging the two cultures, how, you know, musically in some kind of evocative piece. I wanted to create like a real authentic classical piece of music that bridged both. So it was gospel, and I wrote a Hebraic, just a melody, and I got a hold of a cantor of a synagogue named Chaim Frankel, who's a friend of mine, who's a fantastic voice. Yeah. And I called Alex Brown, who was just an amazing singer in town. I've worked with her on records over the years. So she and I wanted to join forces with her. I wrote the music bed and kind of the melody, if you will, and then we started put our heads together, and we kind of came up with this lyric, and she helped in all these facets, and so we co-wrote the piece together. And it really came off emotional and not cheesy, and the hybrids work together. And I love doing that. I love culturizing like that.
Through his conviction and passion, Aaron and Alex were awarded the Emmy for Best Song.
I mean, I love working on John Q. Yeah. But The Notebook I'll always remember, because not only did he and I work together so much, I spent time with him on the set.
Then he came down when I scouted locations. We went and we looked at all these places.
Have you ever been to South Carolina?
No, I haven't.
Hadn't, but I've been 6 times now. And
wow.
It's man, just so breathtaking.
We researched 40s music and South Carolina 40s music in particular, many different types. And then we studied the era. Then he studied the composers from that era.
The opening theme of The Notebook was written from my bodily experience on this little paddle boat going down a river in a place called Edisto, South Carolina. This landscape in my body, and you asked the question of going to set. Well, that's what going to set. I was there, I felt, and I wanted to feel where they were.
Right.
So when I wrote the music, it wasn't me just looking at a picture. I've been there.
Quite frankly, he wrote a piece of music that I didn't really like. And I said, man, we got to do something different. And he looked at me like I was crazy, because nobody likes to have their work, you know, not fully appreciated, but it wasn't right for me for that. I thought it was beautiful, and I said, you know what, man, I want a score where there's 6 or 7 different incredible hooks in there, and I mean, I'm talking about hit song hooks. And he's like, oh yeah, well, you know, I might be able to do that if I did 10 movies. I said, that's the gig, man, you got to do it for this one. And we worked on, he came back and he had one, then he wrote me one hook, then he wrote me another hook. And I said, yep, and after that it became real easy now.
The benefit that we had on The Notebook is because we had our previous relationship from John Q, there was a common language.
It's really weird, because I'll with Aaron, he'll leave me a tune on the thing, and I'll save it on my answering machine for like months, and I'll say, you know what? And I'll leave him an answer going, not dun 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 dun, go dun dun dun, just a different kind of phrasing, dun 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 dun.
A lot of times, you know, you hear color, you know, when you describe something, you know, certain cues, it's like, I need it to be a little bluer, or, you know, let's add a little red to it. And there's a dialogue where you know what that means.
We kind of talk a language that's not technical at all.
Especially with Aaron, she would come over while I was doing cues. On the Notebook, there's this one cue which I call it her cue because I actually rewrote it while she was in the room. He's reading that quote by Walt Whitman. And she says, "We always were in love, weren't we?" She felt it was a little too, there was something sad in the end of the delivery of the cue. It wasn't hopeful enough. We got it to the place where we both liked it, and I liked it better. And I think by the time I got onto the scoring stage, I didn't even do an alt, on the other one. I just, I was Scully's cue. There's some place I'd like to show you. Please?
Okay.
Okay.
So how does it start? You get the movie, and what do they do? What's the first thing they do?
Well, I get the movie, I've read the script. I just start to improvise, so it's, so I could just be playing. And even as I'm playing now, there's nothing that I'm gonna play that I know what I'm gonna play. So I'm just noodling, So maybe there's a melody there. All of a sudden, I went. I mean, that could be. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe there's a sister melody to that. So I'm just kind of noodling. I don't know what and then I'm playing, and all of a sudden maybe something makes sense. Speaking of the Notebook, the Notebook. Here's another process. Like I'm thinking about. Allie's theme was really. There was something about this woman. She was had this great young love, and she grew, and she had this amazing life. And we don't know about her whole life in the movie. And so when I thought about the woman, Jenna, who plays older Allie, I thought about, okay, I'm not, that's Nick's mom, and that's his character. And I know her, I've met her, but she's, spiritually I have to connect to something that I know about and that's so familiar to me. Where did I go? I went to my mom. And my mom's a Francophile. She speaks French. She's all-encompassing, this really talented lady, pianist and harpist. And so I know that she loves Paris so much, and that's like her love, right? So I imagined myself in Paris on the Notebook, and to me it was my mom, and to me it was, it was in Paris, and she's in Paris with a scarf. And it's really quiet, she's by herself. And then to me, this is kind of French. And I started singing, I don't speak French, but I started going, and then the old Smokey Ben Webster saxophone. And it's my favorite melody in the Notebook.
Now, you had shared with me before the Notebook was actually released to all the audiences, they did one last screening, and Aaron's music somehow moved all these executives. Can you just take us through that story a little bit?
Definitely. There's part of the filmmaking process right before a film was released called the final dub. And on the dub stage is where all of the sound effects, all of the dialogue, and all of the music is really fine-tuned. And there's always a final screening for all of the people that have worked on the film, the director, the producers, the studio executives. We sit there and we watch the film one last time to make sure we've gotten everything right before it goes out in the theaters. And all of the people in the room had not seen the film with Aaron's music in it. So this was really a fresh experience for a lot of them. And you know, filmmakers and studio executives work on films sometimes for 2, 3, 4, 5 years at a time. It can take that long. So nothing's really new to them. They've seen the story. They know the ups, the downs. They know where you're supposed to cry. That you tend to become a little cynical because you've seen it, and you may become distanced from it because you're so familiar with it. And the most beautiful thing about this experience is we had all of these grown men and grown women sitting in a room with a very, business, we're really watching this film and making sure it sounds right. And Aaron just wrote such a gorgeous score. And the film didn't end, when the last scene of the film ended. His music carried you out while you were still sitting in your seat. And I looked around the room and I saw so many eyes welled up with tears. I saw people with Kleenex dabbing their nose, and they intentionally didn't turn the lights up for a couple of minutes, and people just sat in silence. And it was the most beautiful experience. I actually could tear up thinking about it. It was really beautiful.
I hope our show has inspired you to follow your bliss. Until our next episode, I'm Susan Saldivar for Inside Cinema. Thank you for watching.
He knows how to write a beautiful theme. He's not afraid to be emotional in his writing.
When you hear his melodies that he writes, you feel like you've composed it with him.
His movements and all his hooks and his passages are all seamless because he's an incredible orchestrator.
He's like a joyful warrior that will not sleep until the last note of music is gotten just right.